As I mentioned previously, my speech is called Is Your Smartphone Giving You Smartphone Elbow? The above question may be especially relevant for anyone who spends more than 5 hours a day on their smartphone device. As, ladies and gentlemen, there is mounting evidence to suggest that people who spend lots of time on the smartphone, be it scrolling, tapping or swiping, may be swiping their way to either cubital tunnel or carpal tunnel syndrome. Now these, for those of you who don't know them, are two painful wrist and hand disorders. So, has anyone even heard of the phenomenon of the so-called smartphone elbow? Well, it would seem that the recent rise in the incidence of cubital and carpal tunnel disorders may well be caused by the overuse of smartphones in this 21st century smartphone addicted world in which we live. Cubital tunnel syndrome and carpal tunnel syndrome are quite similar, but carpal tunnel syndrome is probably the most well known and the most commonly encountered of the two. I therefore reasoned that for the purposes of this speech, I would briefly introduce cubital tunnel syndrome before going on to centre on carpal tunnel syndrome and on some quite interesting research that has recently been carried out by a team of researchers in Hong Kong on the link between carpal tunnel syndrome and smartphone use. So let's start with cubital tunnel syndrome, shall we? What it is and how it differs from carpal tunnel syndrome. Well, cubital tunnel syndrome affects the ulnar, or the funny bone as it's sometimes known, nerve. So the ulnar nerve, which runs through a small groove, which is the cubital tunnel itself, located in your inner elbow. Symptoms of this disorder include tingling and numbness in the hand, especially in the fourth and fifth fingers, connected to the affected arm. Sufferers may also notice pain in their forearm and weakness in their hands. Now, cubital tunnel syndrome occurs when pressure at the elbow causes compression, irritation, and inflammation of the ulnar nerve. Phone activity that can specifically irritate the ulnar nerve includes bending your elbow sharply for long periods as you hold a phone to your ear, or resting your elbows on a desk like so, the arm of a chair, or other hard surfaces as you talk, text or game, I hasten to add. So carpal tunnel syndrome is different from cubital syndrome, or cubital tunnel syndrome rather, in that it involves a different tunnel, the carpal tunnel, which is a narrow and hard pathway of bone and ligament, and it's found at the base of the hand. So the carpal tunnel contains tendons which enable finger bending, as well as the so-called median nerve, which runs from the forearm to the palm and provides feeling to some fingers. Now, carpal tunnel syndrome tends to develop gradually, following repeated pressure to the point where the median nerve passes into the hand and meets the wrist. In the past, before smartphones came along and took over our lives in the way that they have, carpal tunnel syndrome was typically caused by work conditions that called for repetitive, forceful or awkward hand movements, for example typing. This type of extensive use of the hands often results in pain, sometimes extending up the arm. There's also numbness, finger tingling and weakened grip strength. So although the jury is still very much out regarding how much you have to text, swipe and click on your smartphone before you actually increase your risk of developing CTS, or carpal tunnel syndrome, it has long been known, however, that repetitive motions such as typing, painting or hammering can increase the risk of development of the syndrome, especially in those individuals who are particularly prone to it. And now that can either be due to the structure of their wrists or due to previous injuries that they might have that might have narrowed the carpal tunnel. Now, on top of this, there's also significant research and anecdotal evidence to suggest that people with smaller hands who use bigger, plus-size smartphones, as is my own case, or was my own case, may be at particular risk. Peter White, an assistant professor at the Department of Health Technology and Informatics at Hong Kong Polytechnic University, initially undertook a small-scale study where he and his research team, of course, looked at 48 students who used tablets, mobile phones, laptops, computers, and video game consoles for 5 or more hours a day, comparing them with less frequent users. And what they found, this is Peter White and his team, is that they found that there was a link between the extended use of smartphones and other handheld electronic devices and a greater likelihood, ladies and gentlemen, for experiencing the telltale wrist and hand pain associated with carpal tunnel syndrome. Nevertheless, in this initial study, Peter White and his research teams actually stopped short of providing concrete proof that heavy smartphone use directly caused carpal tunnel syndrome. In fact, one prominent hand surgeon actually pointed out that very few people in the real world actually use their smartphones as much as the heavy users in the study did. So White and his associates therefore decided to follow up on their initial study with a larger study, this time involving 500 Hong Kong University students. Now, those students were classified into 2 different groups. The first group was made up of intensive users of handheld electronic devices, intensive being, of course, 5 or more hours of use per day. And then the other group was the non-intensive users. Non-intensive, of course, being those who used their devices less than 5 hours per day. Now, the handheld devices used in the study, I feel it might be relevant to note, included mobile phones, tablet computers, and game consoles. This second study was actually published in the journal Muscle and Nerve, and its findings were that almost 92% of the first group, those who were the intensive users of these handheld electronic devices, had actually suffered musculoskeletal pain in the previous 12 months, compared to just a quarter of the second non-intensive user group. So none of those, that's to say, who spent less than 5 hours on their devices actually suffered wrist or hand pain, but 45.5% of more frequent users did. Now, ultrasound scans that were carried out on these students showed that they also had significantly flattened and enlarged median nerves. Carpal tunnel syndrome, as we know, is caused by compression of this nerve, the median nerve, as it passes through the carpal tunnel. As we've said, the carpal tunnel is a narrow passage in the wrist made up of bones and tissues, which acts as a pulley for the tendons, which then bend the fingers. The authors of the study, so White and his team, state that one explanation is that the design of input devices requiring repetitive finger movements, including clicking, scrolling, swiping, tapping, and pressing buttons, may affect fingertip forces, tendon excursion, and muscular effort. Now, this also follows warnings from back and neck specialists that children as young as 7 are suffering from text neck. Text neck, in other words, is spending so much time stopped over your phones and tablets that these children's spines can be pushed more than an inch out of alignment for what they should be at their age. Now, apart from these known dangers that I've mentioned thus far, this latest study by White and his team also states that the longer people spend on electronic devices, the more pain they suffer in their hands and wrists, and the longer that pain lasts. The author's previous work found that 54% of 500 students that intensively used electronic devices had suffered from these musculoskeletal symptoms. Now, these included people who actually took regular rest and exercise breaks to try and include their risk. So Peter White explains that these repetitive movements compress the nerve that we just explained to you, the one that runs through the hand, and then this leads to the burning feelings, the tingling, and the potential, ladies and gentlemen, potential permanent nerve damage. He then goes on to state that the findings of his studies suggest that just 5 hours on smartphones and tablets a day may therefore significantly increase a person's risk of developing carpal tunnel syndrome, given that the ultrasounds carried out on the affected students in his study all displayed signs of internal damage. Now, as crazy as it might seem, cubital and carpal tunnel syndrome are but the latest afflictions to have been linked to excessive smartphone use after text neck, which we've already mentioned, and shoulder pain. Dr. Stephen Simpson, Director of Research at Arthritis Research UK, says the following about these new phenomena. So previously we only saw these types of repetitive strain injuries in people using a mouse and keyboard at work. And now we have these repetitive movements, all your swiping, your tapping, and in our leisure time, as well as people are barely ever without their smartphones and tablets. So, ladies and gentlemen, after listening to this speech so far, you're probably asking yourselves, what can you do to prevent yourselves from developing so-called smartphone elbow or text neck? Or some of you might even fear that you might already be suffering from so-called smartphone elbow or text neck. So step number 1, as obvious as it may seem, you can lessen or even prevent smartphone elbow by changing your phone habits. Now you could do this in many ways. You could, for example, start using a hands-free headset, or a more fashionable option might be some wireless headphones, like the ones all of the cool kids seem to be walking around town wearing these days. Or you could always try switching your phone from hand to hand for conversations, and avoid positions that require you to rest your elbows on hard surfaces when using your phone, if you're already experiencing symptoms, that is. So if you fall into the second category of people, i.e. those who fear that you are already suffering from one of these 21st century self-inflicted ailments, your first port of call should be the GP for an initial checkup, after which you may well need a referral to a specialist orthopaedic consultant who would initially discuss a variety of effective non-surgical treatments with you that would alleviate your discomfort and calm your stressed nerve, including massage, exercises designed to relieve pressure on the compressed nerve, and other types of physical therapy, or physio, as we call it. Another thing that you can do to help is to give your thumbs a rest, i.e. alleviate the demands that heavy texting can place on your thumb muscles and tendons, causing micro tears in these soft tissue structures. This can lead to pain, swelling, and stiffness in the thumb itself, and in the structures in the palm that control your thumb's movements. So, by using an external keyboard that gets all your fingers involved when you're texting at home and you're not out and about, or while it may slow you down at first, try texting with your index fingers, or alternatively, even simpler, considering using a voice-to-text app when possible. Other non-surgical treatments for CTS may include bracing to keep your wrist from bending up or down, steroid injections to reduce inflammation, and exercises that lessen the stress on the affected nerve. Practical steps to take at home include reducing phone time and other activities that worsen symptoms. It seems, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, that in the smartphone obsessed, constantly connected 21st century world in which we are living, we really do have to raise awareness about these potentially damaging and serious, very serious implications of what our 24/7 WhatsApp based way of life is causing amongst us today. Thank you very much. It's quite long, right?
That was nice.